if you're going to pick a North Star, like if you're going to imagine your ideal world, why would you imagine a world with prisons?
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back to In the Meanwhile. I'm Marcus Harrison Green.
And I'm Nora Kenworthy. Marcus, how are you holding up?
I'm thriving, Nora, absolutely thriving. I am not at all rattled or jilted or jaded or whatever by ICE issuing a secret memo claiming agents can knock down your front door without a judicial warrant. So,
they were doing that already, but I guess now a judge says it's okay. Yeah, not to be deterred by, the Constitution and civil rights or anything. ICE also this week tried to subpoena social media platforms to identify the people behind anti-ICE accounts, which I feel like is sort of like trying to dragnet everyone who likes French fries or something. Like, it's all of us, guys. We all hate you on social media.
I gotta say, Nora, I wish, where are all these civil libertarians supposedly that they only come out when Democrats are in power? It's like, all right, hello, is this thing on, you guys? Yeah. Anyway, what else we've learned this week, though, Nora, is that it's not okay to use social media to criticize the president's secret police. But guess what? It is okay for those same platforms to target children with horrific and addictive content, unfortunately.
Yes. I assume you're referring to the lawsuit against social media giants that's taking place in Los Angeles this week.
That is correct.
Yes. The discovery process for this trial has been sort of like an unending vault of harm sponsored by corporate greed.
Yeah, that's right. Unfortunately, Epstein and Trump do not hold a monopoly on harming children. They also don't hold a monopoly on tacky dressing. If you saw that, Mark Zuckerberg had his gold chain on, and then I guess the sensors kept going off. So it's just like, dude, just leave it in the car, man. Just leave it in the car. Anyway.
Yeah. It's dark out there, folks. And speaking of harming children, immigration detention is now on track to rival the entire federal prison system in size by the end of this term. So things are looking up.
Well, I guess one campaign promise the president's keeping. Nothing on affordability, though, right? Jesus. I gotta say, Nora, I don't know about you, but I've been coping by binging both the America's Next Top Model documentary on Netflix and rewatching Squid Game. And I find both surprisingly soothing. Like with at least with America's Next Top Model, you know, at least Tyra Banks, her sociopathy is on full display, and she's proud of it.
She flaunts it.
You know, she's got a wonderful hot ice cream called Smize. I guess I thought that was a contradiction in terms, but no, apparently not. Anyway,
I guess on both the shows, like, the rules are more transparent than like the rules of the American public right now. And at least on America's Next Top Model, they tell you up front that you're about to be publicly judged under fluorescent lighting, and someone actually gets eliminated each week.
That is too true. And at least with Squid Games, the rules are posted, okay? And the contestants, at least the surviving one, I guess, does have a chance for winning something for their suffering, at least. So there's that. Okay. There's that. Anyway.
Well, Marcus, if both the news and the TV options are getting you down this week, you could also try the new health regimen that's being touted by RFK Jr., who I think we've all seen now, posted a video of himself doing a series of in-sauna workouts and cold plunges with none other than Kid Rock.
I'm sure that's scientifically evidentiary there that it has some health benefits. Of
course it is.
Sure,
yes.
I'll defer to you on that, Nora, as a public health professional. But anyway, I got to say, nothing says winning like getting soaking wet in jeans on purpose with Kid Rock. I would be rethinking my life choices at this moment, but
I know.
Hey, to each their own.
And then toasting each other with refreshing glasses of whole raw milk.
Jesus.
We have the largest measles outbreak in decades, and RFK is promoting swimming in jeans for your health. I'm putting all of us on notice. You need to check on your local health professional because we are not okay right now.
I know. I know, Nora. I know. There are so many times where I'm like, I just, text you with the heart emojis and there's nothing else. Okay.
You're keeping us all going, Marcus.
Yes. I mean, this is like continued proof that Idiocracy was a documentary about the future. It was not a satire. And I mean, we are not only being governed by idiots at this moment, but by people with absolutely no sense of civic responsibility. None, I'd say, like from Epstein to ICE. The word rigged does not even begin to describe how broken our systems of justice feel at this moment.
Yeah. But I think, you and I would both say that these patterns, as shocking as they feel to a lot of us, probably shouldn't actually surprise us or really anyone who's paying attention to criminal justice in this country for more than 15 minutes.
Yeah, maybe even 5. I know things are expedited these days, so people have limited patience. But even 5 minutes, my God. I gotta say, Nora, the framing right now is that something in our system is going wrong. That the system is broken. But I got news for folks, man. That this system is not broken. It's unjust, and it is functioning just as designed.
Yes. The detention, the extraction, the paper-thin due process, if you get it at all, the bodies that literally are becoming paperwork right now. These are not malfunctions. This is the product, right? What we're watching with ICE isn't a bug. It is a feature rollout of our system.
It definitely is. I mean, they pushed a patch, removed some guardrails that were slowing down the throughput. But the core product is humming along just as designed. And I'm so glad, quite frankly, that it seems like more and more people by the day are waking up to that.
Yes, that is the silver lining. And if you have been sitting along with us with that 3 a.m. dread, that feeling that the whole apparatus is profoundly rigged, that mercy is not actually a design feature of American justice, today's episode is for you. And it's going to feel like someone finally putting words to what we've all been carrying.
Yes, we're talking to Emily Galvin Almanza, co-founder and executive director of Partners for Justice, a nonprofit creating a new collaborative model designed to empower public defenders nationwide. Prior to founding Partners for Justice, Emily fought for clients inside the LA County Public Defender, Santa Clara County Public Defender, and Bronx Defenders, and with the Stanford Three Strikes Project. Emily is a graduate of Harvard University and Stanford Law School, and in 2017, she was named one of the American Bar Association's top 40 young lawyers. Her writing has appeared in The Atlantic, The Washington Post, Newsweek, Teen Vogue, and Time.
And she's here with us today to discuss her brand new book, The Price of Mercy: Unfair Trials, a Violent System, and a Public Defender's Search for Justice in America. This book is a necessary, deep, unflinching look at what it actually costs to move through a system that was built to punish those who are economically, racially, and socially marginalized in this country.
Yes, and for our local listeners here in Seattle, Emily will be at Town Hall Seattle on Saturday, February 21st. We hope to see you there. Now, let's get into it. Well, Emily, thank you so much for being with us today. Now, before we get into the policy and data, I'd love to just start with the person. Was there a moment early in your career, whether it was a client, a courtroom exchange, a decision, that made you realize the system wasn't just flawed, but also structurally tilted? And
yes.
Please expand. Please explore.
I didn't have to wait to become a lawyer to figure that out. So as I mentioned in the book, I was arrested when I was a teenager. I had a really, really dark set of years, and one of the bad things that happened was that arrest. But one of the good things that happened in that time was that I happened to be in the courtroom of a judge called Judge Leslie Harris in Boston at the time. And he was a Black man who'd been appointed to the bench during a time when there was so much discrimination that it was very rare for a Black jurist to be appointed to the bench. And he'd had the experience of being the only Black jurist in a courthouse and being treated as if he was not a judge when he entered these spaces. And he had a different background than many of his colleagues in terms of his experience growing up, what he had lived through. I got to interview him for the book, and I encourage people to read his story because he's an amazing story. But what that meant for him on the bench was that he was a judge who was deliberately looking at the children in his courtroom and looking for their potential. He was not looking for the threat they might pose. He was trying to figure out what each kid could do and how he could protect that kid's future. So when I walked into the courtroom, I had no idea how lucky I was to be walking into the ambit of this judge who was determined to set kids on a path of opportunity. And obviously there are a lot of other structural factors. I was the only white kid in the courtroom. I was walking in with the privilege of concerned parents and a good education. And I actually had already been accepted to college, even though I was only 15. And so when Judge Harris met me, he said, like, what are you doing here? You could go to college. Like, why are you in my courtroom? And he told me he never wanted to see me again unless I'd done something good with my life. And he dismissed my case and he expunged my case. And so because of him, I was able to go to college. I mean, had he not done that, I would have had my acceptance rescinded. Because of him, I was able to go into law school. And when I got to law school, by the way, I was really interested in criminal law. Didn't give it a second thought as to why. It was like, I just happened to really connect with the subject matter. But I got a job at the LA County Public Defender's Office. And in my first week on that job, they assigned me to East Lake Juvenile, which was the busiest juvenile courthouse in LA at the time. And so I was walking into rooms with kids who were not that much younger than me and who had done things that I had done. Except for I was white in Iowa and Wyoming, and they were black in East LA. And they were being policed differently. They were being treated differently by the system, by judges. I mean, the entire structural component of how our policy choices drive entire communities of kids into a path of criminalization when their conduct can be identical to that of kids in more privileged circumstances, was slapping me in the face from day one. So my practice as a defender has always been, first of all, very person-centered and not particularly academic, since I'm coming this from a perspective of knowing exactly what it's like to stand in a courtroom being really scared and not knowing what's going on, but also driven by outrage at the inequity that I not only know about, but am party to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. I mean, just the fact that, as you sort of outline, your book does open up with the tension between justice and mercy. And so in a system that promises justice, but often delivers punishment, as you kind of outlined, especially for the poor, for folks who have historically been marginalized, in your eyes, what does equal mercy actually mean in practice?
Oh, that's such a great question. So our system affords the privileged set of people a great deal of mercy, right? And by mercy, what I mean is the ability to look at circumstances through a human lens and understand the root cause of why someone might have come into contact with the system, and also look at their brightest potential path forward and try to do the things that set them on that path. I mean, we've all seen the system bend over backwards, right, to provide opportunities for people of privilege. And it's not just pure innate bias. There are also all these structural factors that go into people of means having the ability to invoke mercy in the courts. I'll give you a very simple example. Let's say you're a teenager and you get pulled over for a DUI. Totally common circumstance, right? If you are a kid of means, your parents can immediately enroll you in some kind of therapy or recovery program or something. Like literally the day after you get arrested, you can be enrolled in some kind of restorative care. And so by the time you show up and talk to a judge, you can say, Judge, this person's taking this case so seriously, they're already in therapy or care. They're already taking steps to address the drinking that got them into this situation. If you can't afford that, or you don't have the connections to navigate, setting up the right insurance that finds you the right program that gets you in, that doesn't have a waiting list. I mean, really, the things that rich people buy, poor people usually have to navigate bureaucracy for and wait a long time to have. And so the very same kid, the only difference being money, will not be able to show up in front of a judge and show how seriously they're taking the case by having already enrolled in something. And so the judge thinks that their decision between those two kids, letting one kid out and giving them a chance and putting the other kid in jail, is about how seriously is this person taking their case. when in fact what the judge was actually saying was how much money and access does this person have. So the system compounds these existing socioeconomic barriers, these fractures in our society. And we really fail to grapple with the fact that the mercy being meted out regularly to those who can afford it is routinely denied to the vast majority of people because 80% of people in the system are so poor that they get a public defender. So when I talk about equal mercy, what I'm really talking about is equalizing the resources on both sides so that people of no means, who are the majority of people in the system, have the same level of access to those things that can provoke mercy within the system's structure.
Yeah, I mean, I was really struck by a line early in your book. You write that justice was the promise of the system, but punishing poverty is the reality. And one of the things that you write about is sort of how the system itself is designed to trend towards punishment, right? And that punishment is unequally allocated, as you note in the book. In your experience, at what point in the criminal process does the sort of system sort of veer towards punishment, especially for those who are most poor? And can you talk us through some of the kind of like most important kind of points at which in that process someone ends up being overly punished?
Oh, yeah. It's happening before arrest, to be clear. So like if you grow up in East LA, in a neighborhood where police have chosen to place a large number of officers, already your life is more geared towards punishment than towards promise. The reason I say that is, you know, when I was representing kids, so many of the kids that I represented when they were 14 or 15 had their first contact with police when they were literally 7 or 8. It's actually what I'm writing about next. My next book is called Andromeda Diaz and the Reasonable Doubt. And it's a middle grade novel to teach kids about early criminalization and what their rights are and how to invoke their rights and how to protect each other under these circumstances. But that choice to concentrate police in one neighborhood means that the kids in that neighborhood who are like riding their dirt bikes on the sidewalk or like, you know, running through someone else's yard, those kids are getting arrested for trespassing, for disorderly conduct, for dirt bikes. And the kids who are doing the same thing in a wealthy gated community are not experiencing criminalization at all. So already we have a divide. People think that heavy arrest rates in a neighborhood represent heavy crime in that neighborhood. And they don't realize that what they're seeing is actually a policy choice of police concentration, and that there may be, honestly, just as much invisible crime in a neighborhood where police do not choose to go and the residents do not choose to call them. So that's thing number one. Then we get to the question of arrest and bail. And bail already is like such a weird American thing. Like we don't realize that our bail bonds industry, which is an industry that profits off of people's need to buy their liberty back from the government in this country. It's a $2 billion a year industry. That sort of thing was made illegal in England more than 50 years ago. This is not normal to have a for-profit industry of people's freedom. Uniquely North American. Conditioning liberty on wealth doesn't serve any purpose, right? It doesn't condition liberty on ability to come back to court or on safety for the community. It literally just says, if you have enough money, you can buy yourself out of jail, which means that since people who are in jail plead guilty significantly faster and more often than people who are fighting their case from home, which makes sense because they're cut off from their job, their family, their ability to pay rent, often cut off from their healthcare, their medications. People of low wealth are being forced to plead guilty much more often and much faster than people of means. And that, of course, results in a different level of criminal record for people of low wealth versus people of wealth in this country. Going on into the pretrial process, it's kind of the example I gave you before, right? Like wealthier people can afford to bring an expert in on their case or to get therapy that might be very mitigating in front of the judge. They can afford to come back to court. I mean, oftentimes people imagine you come back to court like once or twice and resolve your case, but actually people are coming back to court like 10, 12, 18 times over years, every time having to take the day off from work, find childcare, find transportation, pay for parking. That's if they're lucky enough to be out of custody, let alone if they're sitting in jail, being thrown on a freezing bus at 3 a.m. with no breakfast. So People of means can obviously withstand what I call the grind, which is this really frustrating, lengthy process in which it seems to the system user like nothing is happening, when in fact, the lawyer is fighting to get discovery, which is often very slow to be handed over. They're fighting to get equal access to information. Like, this pretrial process is almost intentionally designed to make people plead guilty, and wealthy people have the ability to cushion themselves more from that pressure. Then the same factors when it comes to sentencing, right? Again, ability to present, the ability to pay for an ankle monitor and say, I'll do this time at home instead of going into custody, or the ability to present mitigating options or therapeutic programs, or to pay for inpatient treatment. When it comes even to the ability to withstand time in custody, I mean, just look at how much commissary items cost. I know this seems very like a unimportant issue to people outside prison walls, but like, if you're trying to survive in a place where like deodorant and toothpaste costs 5 times as much as it should cost you, and slave labor is legal inside of prison, so you're making literally pennies per hour at a job you did not choose, it's excruciating. I interview a warden, a former warden, and actually a former director of corrections for the entire state of California in the book, who talks about how restorative and meaningful it is for people to be able to send a gift home to their child at their child's birthday, or to send a Christmas card. And like, people can't do that on slave wages with a commissary that has exorbitant prices. So on the inside, people of no means are further entrenched in poverty. Their family usually bears the majority of the cost, not just of that commissary, but of court debts, of fines and fees, of restitution, of whatever other debts are saddled upon that person. Court debt at this point is so significant that a study out of Alabama showed that people in Alabama were committing new crimes to pay back old court debts. Literally over 30% of the people in the study had committed new crimes, and a portion of them had committed new, more serious crimes just to pay back the old debts that the court system had imposed. Iowa is actually really famous for this as a state, imposing debt even on people who are exonerated and found not guilty. So you can be accused of something, fight the case, be found totally not guilty, be exonerated, and still owe tens of thousands of dollars to the court system for the privilege of having been wrongfully prosecuted. And then when it comes to reentry, people who have a strong social network, a place to come home to, are going to do better reintegrating than people who have not been able to save any money while in, whose family has gone into debt taking care of them, whose relationships have been fractured by distance and also by need, right? Like, it's very hard to be the one always saying to your family, I'm so sorry, I actually need a little bit more cash, can you help me out? You're coming home to a very different relationship, a very different level of stigma, a level of social exclusion. When we look at studies of how people do in this world, people who have housing, who have income, and who have healthcare are much less likely to commit crimes in the first place and much less likely to recidivate than people who don't have those things. And those things are all tied to wealth in this country. So obviously I could talk about this for a while, but the answer is, at every single stage in this system, at every single point, money makes a huge difference. And that may be in part why the system tends to direct itself so much more towards people of low means, because those people are much easier targets.
Yeah, I mean, this is such a widespread incrimination of the overall system. So I appreciate you walking us through it. It also reminds me a bit of the sort of criminalization of poverty that we saw with like the poorhouses in England, in like Dickensian days.
Yeah.
I mean, we uphold this idea of innocent until proven guilty as so sacred to our justice systems in the U.S., but what you're describing is so far from that. Can you talk about, like, does that still hold any meaning for us?
Man, no. So look, if we really believed people were innocent until they were proven guilty, would we allow a system that strips them of everything on the basis of mere accusation? No. It's also really hard. It's hard. Like, people don't realize that holding true to the value of believing someone to be innocent until proven guilty is actually a mental effort. When I'm selecting a jury for a case, one of the first things I often ask people is like, who here has ever been driving down the side of the road and seen somebody pulled over and thought, like, I wonder what that guy did, right? We've all done that. But the presumption of innocence is an active choice to believe that guy did nothing. and to believe that the government got it wrong. And when you are a juror walking into the jury room, to believe you are there to exonerate someone, to believe that the person in the defense seat is wrongfully accused. And only when the government gives you proof beyond any reasonable doubt, any doubt for which you can articulate a reason, only then can you accept that the government might have gotten it right. Almost nobody, I mean, like, think about it. Do you ever do that in your head? Well, no, nobody does that. It's a value that's not tied to a cultural norm. It's a value that we don't actually hold as a people. It's a value we articulate. And then the reason it's not realized is that it's not genuinely held. So the voters who are electing the prosecutor are not electing a prosecutor who's going to be very, very careful representing the innocence of their constituents. The voters electing judges and sheriffs are not electing judges and sheriffs who promise to hold sacred their duty to protect the innocent from conviction, or their duty to get it right. We're often electing people who promise to be tough on crime, right? And who are not going to give anybody a chance. Like, that's the value that people actually hold. Now, what I'm hoping with this book is that I can point out to people that that's a really emotional way to make policy, right? Like, that's not rational. Electing people who are going to go after people you're afraid of or you're mad at is not actually a choice that favors public safety. The research in the book, like literally 100 pages of the book, is citations of research that was vetted by someone I hired who has a PhD in study design. It's really, really good 100 pages of studies showing that if we were making rational policy choices, we would actually choose choices that address the root causes of system involvement, that are restorative, that diminish exposure to incarceration, which makes people more likely, exposure to incarceration makes people more likely to engage in harm in the future. We would be making literally the opposite choices of the choices we make now. But we're making emotional choices that reflect a culture of punitiveness. And until we stop doing that, we're not going to have real safety.
Absolutely. I'll say, Emily, you said that it wouldn't be till Saturday when you're in Seattle at your Town Hall Seattle event that you were going to bring the spicy. But I mean, you got the cayenne pepper coming this morning, I tell you.
Well, it's a spicy system. The answer is that I've been in it for a while, so it's been making me mad since 2007.
I overstand on that. So do you want to ask? You cite in the book that about 70% of people in jail haven't been convicted of anything. Mm-hmm. And so if outcomes track wealth more than guilt, and if simply being charged can cost someone their job and home, at what point do we have to admit that what's going on right now isn't a broken system, but that this system is functioning exactly as designed?
That's something you're always going to hear me say, right? And like most people who share my perspective on this system and study it in the same way that I do are going to be very careful to, one, not call it the justice system. We call it the legal system because that is more accurate. There's not a lot of justice to be found in it. But also we're going to acknowledge that this is a system designed to be this way. I actually, one of my favorite parts of the book that I got to work on, which is one of the nerdiest parts, is about the history of discovery, right? Because like ordinary rules of fair play suggest that if a person's accused of a crime, they should get to see the evidence against them. It's in the Constitution, right? The right to confront your accuser means the right to see the evidence against you. And yet we have this inane system of discovery rules that are like totally different state to state, not consistent anywhere, and in many states result in what we call trial by ambush, meaning you're not really entitled to see anything until you're at that moment of trial. Well, guess what? Most cases end in a negotiated disposition. Over 90% of cases never make it to trial. So if you say you don't get to see the evidence till you get to trial, but oh yeah, most people can't withstand this process long enough to even make it to trial, most people are pleading guilty without fully seeing the evidence against them. How did we get here? How did we let is this a bureaucratic accident? No. There was a specific prosecutor who was placed on the committee to create the criminal rules of procedure back in the late 1930s. And he made it his mission to tilt the rules of the system again and again towards the prosecution. And there's a very clear racial theme in what he was doing. He literally makes comments about not wanting defendants to go unwhipped of justice merely because of a procedural rule. And there's all of this horrible commentary in the transcripts from those meetings about, how the system, by becoming more expeditious, is protecting Black defendants who, of course, can't really help themselves, and we just need to make the system move faster for them. Like, it'll turn your hair white to read this stuff. But it's a demonstration that, like, when I say the system is working as it was intended, I'm not speculating. That's not my opinion. Like, we can look at the people who set up these structures and we can see, oh, they very much wanted a prosecutorial advantage, and a lot of this was about race. And no one since then has successfully undone that. There have been a lot of amazing efforts, and like literally half the book is really cool innovations that have done magnificent work to make things better and to dismantle pieces of the system. So I don't want to say like nothing has changed since then. Like, a great deal has changed and people deserve a lot of credit for that work. But the fundamentals, like, nobody has said, hey, we need to make discovery open, accessible, and free across the 50 states because this system was created by a super racist prosecutor dude who didn't want anyone to have a fair shot. We need to undo that. Nobody's been able to pull that off.
I mean, it's incredible to hear that the history of many of these laws is just so overtly harmful, and also not surprising.
They say the quiet part out loud all the time. I mean, like, the reason escape from custody is a crime in this country, like in most systems that are similar to ours, escape is considered a natural human reaction to confinement, right? If you confine a person, you should expect that they will want to escape, like breathing. But in our country, with our legacy of slavery, escape has a very different cultural meaning. And so we punish escape much more harshly than similarly situated nations. I mean, throughout, looking at the way the Black codes were created in the Deep South, you know, after the Civil War, it's just like, I just want to emphasize that, like, when people say this stuff is race-based, like, again, it's not an opinion. It's just our history, and we have to be honest about that.
Yeah. Thank you for clarifying that. So I found this line in the book really powerful. You were talking about your job as a public defender, sort of from law school onwards, and you said your job was to, quote, try to undo the viciousness of the state one person at a time. And I'm curious, because so much of what we're talking about here are really systemic problems. At what point did you realize that undoing injustice also demanded these much larger scale reforms that you're talking about in the book?
It's something that's evident all the time as a defender, right? Like, you're dealing with the same problem again in another case. You're like, this is like the 100th case I've had this year that has this problem, and this problem is ridiculous. The problem maybe being, you know, I don't get to see what people said in the grand jury, or the problem being we are criminalizing kids for going over to their friend's house, and we're accusing them of trespassing if their friend isn't home to let them in. Like, we're using resources for this. We're using resources to arrest people for not paying the subway fare. Like, so it's evident from the very beginning. As a line defender, I think my perspective has always been like, there are good people working on policy reform, and my job is to be the person who puts my mind and my mouth and my body in between my client and the full weight of the government. And I'm really good at that, and I'm passionate about it. And my joy is to talk to community members, to talk to a jury and say, let's not do this, and build consensus around not doing this to this person. And it's also my job to be the root cause thinker, right? When a person has really engaged in harm, but the reason that brought them here is addressable, I'm really good at convincing prosecutors that we should address that underlying reason. That's a really important role, because, like, as glorious as it is to be working at a system scale, and I say this now with love, because, like, Partners for Justice, which is the nonprofit I started, is working at system scale. It's enhancing public defense. We've eliminated nearly 9,000 years of incarceration since we started. A study just showed that our work reduces convictions or increases non-convictions, like dismissals and diversion, by nearly 50%. Like, it's glorious to work at system scale. But the clients who are sitting in jail right now can't wait for someone to fix the policy that put them there. So somebody has to be the person in the arena. And I loved doing that work. And that's partly why this book is in many ways a love letter to public defense, right? Because there are people who are working for very little pay with crushing caseloads as our last bastion of protection for ordinary people who stand accused, but also for our Constitution. Because for every one of those people for whom a public defender stands up for their Fourth Amendment rights and wins, all of our Fourth Amendment protections are stronger for it. So both are valorous.
No, absolutely. So Emily, you had mentioned about, folks who have engaged in harm and, making those root causes of why they engage in harm addressable. And so I do want to bring up that you were amongst the first attorneys who brought, post-reform petitions under California's three strikes law. And so I want to ask you, what did working with people who were serving life sentences teach you about redemption and reconciliation, and about, the mythology of the irredeemable person?
Oh, that's such a great question. Thank you so much for that question. So first of all, one thing you learn is that there is so much talent languishing in our prisons. One of my three strikes clients was a man named Crispino Cañada Leal. And when I met him, he had gone into prison, he had 2 prior strikes, and he had a third strike that I was going to work on, which I thought was borderline under the reform. He might be eligible for release. It was a long time ago. These are things that had happened in his 20s. And that was, by the way, a theme with all of my clients. There were things that had happened in their 20s, sometimes really dumb stuff. Like imagine getting a life sentence for stealing $30 worth of plumbing supplies from Home Depot, right? Or a life sentence for stealing a pair of socks. Or a life sentence for putting your arm through a window and taking a placemat, right? Like these were life sentences that we were seeing in California at the time. But Cañada had made a decision, as many, many, many of my lifer clients had. At a certain point, there's a period of hopelessness during his early incarceration where he was in his 20s, feeling like his life was gone. And then there was a turning point where he decided that his life was not gone and he was going to make the most of his life wherever he was. And again, this is a theme that I saw among my lifer clients, who would often really commit themselves to living their life, their best life, even though they were behind bars. And for Cañada, that had involved working his way up through a number of jobs, starting with janitorial, electrical, and just being amazing at what he did. If he was going to clean a floor, he was going to clean that floor better than anybody had ever cleaned that floor. And again, I want to point out there's a tension here because we're talking about slave labor in prison, but we're also talking about an individual's ability to decide to own their own labor by choosing to do it how they wish, in a way that serves their internality. So both things can be held as true, right? That slave labor is inherently bad. And also the value of labor to the individual who is using that as a means to fulfill a piece of his life, that's not something we should detract from. Which is why the right answer, by the way, is to pay people for their labor in prison, have a minimum wage, etc. But he had worked his way up so substantially that he ultimately was in this program called The Last Mile at San Quentin, which was teaching guys in San Quentin to code. Now, most of these guys had literally never held a cell phone. They'd been in for a really long time. They'd never seen a web page. I remember a client of mine saying hey, a web page it's like a flyer, right? It's I guess it is kind of like a flyer. But they're learning coding in the abstract. 1, how much intellectual horsepower does it take to learn technology you are not allowed to touch? But 2, by the time I'm gonna toot my own horn a little bit. By the time my pretty awesome litigation and that of the Three Strikes Project generally, and Mike Romano, who's the head of the project, still is, by the time our efforts had gotten him out of that life sentence, he had 3 or 4 job offers waiting for him in tech in Silicon Valley. Since that time, he's gone on not only to excel in those tech jobs, but he recognized that although his training in The Last Mile was amazing, many other guys who got out in a similar situation to him didn't have enough training to really succeed in these high-end tech jobs. And so he created a program that goes farther in terms of training. It's called The Next Chapter. He's the executive director and founder of a nonprofit that is placing people from prison into $100,000 plus tech jobs, and also fostering now entrepreneurial work among that set. It's a great set because if you look at a survey of managers from a few years ago, 86% of them rated their formerly incarcerated employees as highly or higher than their non-formally incarcerated employees. So I'm mentioning this example because my experience in Three Strikes work taught me that long sentences don't make sense. People change. We all know people change. By the time you meet someone in their middle age or older, they're not the same person they were in their 20s when they went in. The sentences we have in this country make no sense at all. And what we're doing is paying a huge amount of money, because elders in prison is the fastest growing prison demographic and the most expensive to incarcerate because of health needs. We're paying a huge amount of money to keep people locked up who could be adding so much to our society. Kenyatta's a job creator. He's an innovator. And he's one of many people in the book I mentioned who have become lawyers, educators, professors, entrepreneurs, journalists, all of whose talents we are missing and literally paying to be deprived of as long as we have sentencing schemes as insane as we do.
As you're speaking, I'm really thinking about the writing of a lot of prison abolitionists who sort of say, once you see the depths of this system, there's kind of no way not to be an abolitionist. And yet, at the same time, you're describing to us very, very powerful reforms that have brought a great deal of improvement to conditions, not just ending three strikes laws, but expanding diversion programs. For listeners who might feel torn between the principles of abolition and incremental reform, like, where do you place yourself on that spectrum, and how do you think about that tension?
I think we've made too much of the tension, actually. I identify in the book as an abolitionist because my feeling is, if you're going to pick a North Star, like if you're going to imagine your ideal world, why would you imagine a world with prisons? Like, that makes no, like, let's pick a better goal, guys.
Yes, like, fair.
the idea isn't let's ban prisons immediately and figure it out thereafter. Maybe for some people that is the plan, but I think that that might be not the wisest plan long term. I quote Ruth Wilson Gilmore in the book, and I talk a lot about how what prison abolition is about creating the conditions through which we no longer need prisons. Why would you not want to do that? Why would you want to continue to? So, like, the policies that I'm suggesting, I tried to be very careful. This is great advice I got from Michelle Alexander, which is to only call something a solution if it's actually dismantling a piece of the system. Other things can be innovations, they can be improvements, they can be reforms. A solution is something that, like, meaningfully moves us closer to the goal of not needing this stuff. Now, I'm not talking about a world in which you need to call for help and there's nobody there to call, or like somebody's hurting you and there's no way to get that person away from you. Like, obviously, as long as we have people engaging in interpersonal harm in the community, we really need a way to separate folks who can't be safe around others right now. I get that completely, which is why a lot of the reforms I talk about in the book are incremental. I am not someone who is like an abolition accelerationist. Like, I don't think it's fair to preserve horrible things in order to increase political pressure for change, because I have served my clients and I don't think that they deserve to suffer while other people have the luxury of fighting for policy reform. I think that alleviating suffering right now is just as important as fighting for long-term change. I think we can do both. I'm also not someone who believes that incremental reforms hamper long-term efforts at change. I think they shift the Overton window of what's normal in our society. So, for example, banning the type of prison we have now in which 80% of people experience or witness violence daily, and insisting upon forms of separating people that foster opportunity, that treat people with dignity, that give them income, that give them the ability to build skills and seek education, like that shifts what's normal in our society and shifts us away from a violent punishment mindset where we believe that dehumanization of others is a legitimate use of our governmental infrastructure. So basically, this is a very long-winded way of saying, if you're worried about identifying as an abolitionist, don't worry. You can say, this is my North Star. This is where I want us to get to someday as a society. And I'm going to continually make the choices in my voting life and in my policy-oriented life. that invest in humans so that humans are less likely to engage in harm, so that we are less likely to need prisons in the future. That is totally fine. You do not have to be one of those obnoxious people who says, I'm an abolitionist and I don't know how we do it and I don't know how we get there. That's someone else's job to figure it out. You don't have to do that. You can just make good moves in the now that make us safer and healthier and more able to thrive.
Yeah, I appreciate that practicality, I must say. I want to ask you, as I'm somebody who is a member of the media, and we know that the media can certainly perpetuate various narratives and myths that people then absorb as truth. And so I want to ask you, when we see how things are depicted in popular media, in terms of, the courtrooms as, these dramatic, arenas of truth and fairness and so forth, in your mind, what are the biggest myths TV and movies sell us about criminal courts, and how do those myths protect the status quo? So like, when, I don't know, if Reese Witherspoon or Gwyneth Paltrow ever come to you, trying to make your book into a Netflix series, what are you telling them about the myths that continue to be perpetuated from popular media?
Oh my God, Reese or Gwyneth, if you're listening, like, I'm ready. I'm ready. I would be so hyped about that. I really believe in the media's power to change. Like, I believe in the power of storytelling in a really, really big way. It's hard to articulate just one thing. So for example, I teach a class at Stanford Law School on Law and Order, the show. It's an advanced criminal law course where we use old episodes of Law and Order to talk about sort of legal realist approach to criminal law, and also what the population of the United States understands about criminal law. And again, we see this idea of like, well, prison's not great, but it's all we have. And like, the system's not perfect, but it's what we've got. And so we've got to just use what we have. So one thing is, that mindset arises from the media's inability to highlight the sort of like dark side of the moon of this system, by which I mean, the media is going to cover every single person who is released on bail and then does something bad. But the thousands of people who got released on bail and therefore were able to make it home for dinner with their kids and like be at their daughter's dance recital. And because of that, she did not have the adverse childhood experience of parental incarceration. And so her life is better. We're not hearing those stories because those stories are not newsworthy. They're not unique or one of a kind or like, so it's hard for the media to figure out a way to give the public an honest picture of what the status quo is. So for example, if we cover every single carjacking in a jurisdiction, and there are 6 of them in a year, but in fact, this is a jurisdiction with tens of millions of people in it, and carjacking is so rare actually in this jurisdiction that you're much, much more likely to die being hit by a car while riding a bicycle. We're not giving people an honest assessment of what their risk of harm actually is. We're highlighting a rare but shocking risk. The same way when the media covers like weird crime stories, right? Like, the Idaho guy who came into a house with a bunch of college kids and did something horrifying. We're covering that. So people think that stuff is much more common than it actually is. Like, we're living, if you're younger than 50 years old, you're living through the safest period in your lifetime. But for the media to cover the story of, hey, we're really safe right now, crime is really far down, that stats story is just not as compelling as the Idaho crime, right? Like, it doesn't stick in your head the same way. And so again and again, the population is given an inaccurate picture of their actual level of safety. And they're also given stories that help them identify with fear and the victimhood, and don't help them identify with the relief of an accused person being treated humanely or given an opportunity. I would love to see more stories covering innovations like, alternative first response programs and diversion programs and like things that route people out of the criminal court system, or that cover stories of success like Kenyatta, right? I don't know that that's enough. I think the media is in a really hard spot because I understand that newsworthiness, and like also for a lot of journalists, this is something they don't like either, the clickability of stories is often governing what they are forced to cover, what they are pushed to cover. So at the very least right now, My hope is that journalists will start covering this with a more skeptical mindset, will start treating police communications departments as unreliable, which they are. I think we're learning that from this moment with the federal government. We're learning that like the story law enforcement gives about an incident, not usually perfectly accurate the first time out the gate. Also encouraging them to cover the stories of people who have been harmed by the system, who have survived the system, stories of safety without the system, stories of community interventions, restorative justice, community violence intervention. Like, there's a story about this group Dads on Duty that I'm like low-key obsessed with. Having police in schools is a really bad trend in this country. There are schools, millions of schools in this country that have police but no social worker, or police but no nurse, or police but no school counselor. And there's a really troubling study showing that contact with police can cause a child to disengage from school as rapidly as the next day. So having cops criminalizing kids and looking for arrestable offenses in our schools is obviously not great for the future of children who experience that. The program Dads on Duty was basically a group of dads who wanted to make the school safer without introducing a police element. So they just set up a rotation and they got matching t-shirts, say Dads on Duty, and they go to the school, and when they see kids who are doing like knucklehead stuff, they give them the dad look, and the knucklehead stuff stops. And like dads in the school has actually made a really meaningful difference to the number of incidents in the school. The number of incidents have gone down. Students are safer. The parents are involved. It's a program that's replicable. It's spreading to other schools. I would love to see more stories like that, because that's a good idea that's building great data, that's really feasible to implement, very rewarding for everyone involved. Like, that should definitely be the headline to me over like yet another carjacking story.
I mean, so much of what you're describing to us in this conversation is really about shifting the norms of everyday people, but I would say especially dominant white people who control so much of this country. And the norms that we hold about, presumed guilt, what it means to punish people and where people should be punished and where our resources should go. But it occurs to me that, in addition to storytelling, there might be other ways to shift those norms for people. And are there other examples you have for us of how these sort of deeply held norms, which of course are so shaped by our racist history, how they can be shifted for juries, for people who are voting for attorneys general and prosecutors? Like, what does that look like?
So I think we're all in a cultural moment now of massive voter education. So much of what we're seeing in the news from the federal government has its roots in the criminal court. Like, you want to talk about officials potentially perjuring themselves in front of Congress? Well, in my book, let's talk about how often people are not punished for perjury, and the idea of test-lying by law enforcement being so common that it's literally immeasurable. Or you want to talk about violent mass detention, like, we can talk about the conditions of confinement that already exist in our prisons and the Eighth Amendment jurisprudence that has been significantly weakened by the courts over time so that people who are detained have fewer rights and less of an ability to protect themselves. Like, all of what we're seeing, I think, is opening the eyes of a ton of people right now to the fact that a lot of their assumptions about the righteousness of the government are wrong. But beyond that, one thing that really comes to mind for me is the idea of changing who gets to vote and who gets to be on juries. So right now, people with convictions are often excluded from jury service, and in many states not allowed to vote. So if you remove an entire constituency from the population, and oh, by the way, that constituency is really tilted because, again, this is rooted in where we choose to put police, who we choose to prosecute, who has the means to invoke mercy in the system, you wind up with jurisdictions in which a third of the Black men there cannot vote and cannot serve on a jury, the two most important civic duties we have. They cannot have a voice. If prosecutors running for office had to be concerned about those men's needs as constituents, or prosecutors trying a case needed to be concerned about the perspective of those men on the jury, they would behave differently. And so a huge part of the problem here is excluding vast swaths of people from having a political voice in our society. Another thing, and this is kind of small, is just like the low level of information we demand from local candidates for office. This drives me insane. Like, in the small jurisdiction where I live, we often have people running for office, and I have no idea who they are. Like, I will Google them and I'll find like, okay, this guy wrote a nice letter to the editor for our local paper about how much he likes playing tennis with his doctor. What does he believe in? I don't know. Okay, this person published a poem. That's fantastic. What's their platform? I don't know. So many people are voting for judges or sheriffs or prosecutors because of the D or the R next to their name. That is so not a good basis to vote for someone in my field, because in my field, carcerality cuts across the political spectrum. There are Democrats who are terrible on these issues. There are Republicans who are great on these issues, vice versa. So you really, if you're looking for a candidate in a specific criminal legal system facing role, we need to have they need to be publishing a platform. They need to have an opportunity to be questioned by the public. They need to, at the very least, do a Q&A with the local paper. And these are norms that like our media can enforce, right? Like our media can make a big deal about it if a candidate is running for office without saying what their platform is. They can, it astonishes me that often in my jurisdiction, no one's making a big deal about the lack of platforms from candidates. Like we can enforce this and make ourselves more informed. That's a huge piece of it. So really beyond storytelling, I think the most important thing is understanding and broadening who is the political constituency and who gets to have a say.
Absolutely. That's how we get the George Santoses of the world, I suppose, with with the lax media oversight. That being said, just a final question for you, Emily, and thank you so much for being so generous with your time today. Being that you do get that you're in the job that you are in, and that the things that you see on a daily basis, I do just want to ask you what keeps you in this fight? What keeps you progressing and moving forward, and not just throwing up your hands and, quite frankly, selling out and working for some large law firm and calling it a day? I don't.
Many things. We're making progress. We are. Like, one of the reasons this period in history is so safe is that after 2020, a lot of really cool reforms were passed. And one of the big problems is that carceral policies are quick. They disappear people off the street immediately, and they do harm that increases crime in the long run. But to the public, it's largely invisible because they're doing harm inside a prison. Policies that make us safer tend to be slow and tend to be less satisfying in the short term, right? Like, it's not disappearing people. It's working really hard to get people housing and income and access to healthcare. But these slow policies that voters had a tolerance for since 2020 have really worked. And so we're seeing safety right now that we've earned, and that's really cool. I also know that the system is not sustainable. It's too stupid to be sustainable. Like, oftentimes I'm explaining to people, like, the fixes in this book are like really easy. Like, okay, having an after-school program drops youth involvement in crime by 50%. Make an after-school program. Like, this is really feasible stuff. So I feel like what I'm fighting for is very sensible, not terribly political, really feasible, attractive, has multiple other benefits. Like, if you repair a dilapidated house in a rundown community, crime around that house drops by about 20%. And you've increased property values for that homeowner and for that community, right? So, like, doing good things in the world has many benefits. And I feel like I'm fighting for the idea of doing good things in the world. I also know who I'm fighting for. Like, I've represented over 2,000 people, and I'm, friends with many of them, and like in contact with people. Like, I'm not fighting for an abstraction. Like, I can fight for people that I can picture and name, and I am a criminal defense attorney, so I'm not going to name them. I hold their privacy as well. But that's really, really motivating. And also, this is a system that has so many, like, ripples. Like, if we stop criminalizing and traumatizing entire swaths of our population, particularly children, we will see really cool benefits 10 years from now in a healthier, safer, more thriving world. Where some kid who wasn't incarcerated is going to invent the first warp engine. So my vision of what I could bring about drives me forward. Also, I tried working for money. I did do a summer at a law firm. It was super cool. Turns out I love antitrust work. I can't stay interested in a job unless I feel really, really passionate about it. So unfortunately, if anybody wants to pay me way more money to do this stuff, cool. But for right now, I will take I'll take the financial hit and keep my passion, if that's okay.
Awesome. Well, when Nora becomes president, if you want to head up the FCC and to be the next Linda Khan, well, I'm sure she's gonna, Lena Khan, excuse me. Yes.
Mignon Clyburn, another great example.
Yeah. In the meantime, we will pump up your book, and we will look forward to supporting you at Town Hall this week. So
thank you so much. Yeah, I can't wait to be in Seattle Town Hall. It's going to be great.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much for your time, and we'll catch you in the meanwhile, I suppose. I gotta say, Nora, these conversations, I love all of our conversations, to be point blank. I just want to say that because I love all of our guests, but there are definitely times where we have an episode like this where it's just, for me, it's just such a wealth of knowledge and just an abundance of wisdom. And Emily definitely brought that today. And I will say this. I mean, I think she is such an example of somebody who, has forgone, making a ton of money in the corporate world to actually try to do good public work. Obviously put you in that category as well, Nora. You could have had those Maha paychecks, but instead you are actually doing.
I think that's an insult, Marcus.
Not to your bank account, Nora. Just to your intelligence, but not to the bank account. No, but I mean, in all honesty, I will say this. I mean, what I've seen is that so many people, I think, want to blame everything on our current presidential regime, and there is a lot to blame on them. But I think what gets missing is that these systems weren't working to begin with, and sure, this administration has made them worse, but I mean, they were pretty effed up prior to him coming in. And, and if we don't do something right now, quite frankly, they will continue to be effed up long after he's gone. And so we need to definitely do all that we can to do some level of repair and fixing. And I know, and grant you, I know there are a lot of listeners who are like, there's no way that it can be repaired. I get that and understand it. But until we sort of get to where we really want to get to in terms of a true justice system, there are certainly things that at the very least can make this, what did Emily call it? This, the law system, I guess.
Much the legal but not justice
legal
system.
Yes, the legal but not justice system work slightly better than it does right now.
Yeah. I mean, I think her work is such a cool embodiment of what Trisha Rose was talking to us about earlier this year, about the power of systems thinking to understand the full structure of racial oppression. And what I kind of see Emily doing is applying a real systems thinking lens to the legal system, and by doing that, figuring out these really meaningful places to actually make some traction and make some change.
Yeah, and I will just say to the listeners, I will tell you, the book is very much worth reading. I'm unfortunately only halfway through it. I didn't get a chance to read the entire thing.
You're not supposed to say that, Marcus.
I know. I'm all for full transparency with our listeners. We
only had 3 days, so you're doing well.
That being said, please, y'all, go get this book. And then share it with a friend as well. I mean, you talk about it being applicable to day-to-day life. It is absolutely applicable to every single person who resides in this country's life. So please do get it. That being said, Nora, shall we share our joy and abundance today with our listeners?
I guess I can go first. Mine is very general, and I think probably shared by lots of people, but I am really loving watching the Olympics right now. I have this the joy that only a person who's terrible at sports can have at watching people just be so extraordinarily talented at all of these things that most of us would never in a million years try once in our lives.
Yes.
And I don't know, there's so many moments of just pure unfettered joy in this Olympics, whether it was like that dog that ran the cross country, right?
That was awesome, by the way.
That was awesome. I know. We love that dog. So this is also my petition for Dog Olympics next year. I feel like that could be great.
How does that not exist, by the way?
I don't know. I'd also love to see like arts and crafts or like reading Olympics for those of us who do not have sports prowess.
Thank you. We need to start that early on, I gotta say.
Yeah. But just like celebrate human amazingness. We need more of that.
Yeah. Did you also see? It was a couple that 2 Olympians that they ended up getting engaged. I think
there's been several of those actually.
This week. Yeah, but it was 2 Olympians. They'd met in 2022, and then now they've come full circle of getting engaged, and I'm all for that. So yeah. Anyhow, I think for me, my joy for this week, I think it was reflecting on the words of Reverend Jesse Jackson, who passed away this week. And I wrote about this actually in The Stranger, but it was in his 1988 Democratic National Convention speech, which has become known as the Keep Hope Alive speech. He was essentially given a concession. He had finished second in the nominee process to Michael Dukakis, and it was the closest that any candidate of color, let alone a black man, had came.
Yeah,
at
and
that
he came
point
really close.
Heading up a major party. I mean, it should be said that he came so close by having this very inclusive message of this Rainbow Coalition that addressed every single, addressed various specific communities' concerns, but also talked about the economic uplift of all of them. And one of the things at the speech that I think gets forgotten about, 38 years later, is the fact that this was somebody in the public eye, a very prominent politician at the time, who was willing to talk so candidly about the AIDS epidemic and also about the LGBTQIA plus community at the time, when that was looked at as quote unquote a political liability. But he himself, he was a Christian reverend, and who I will say, as somebody who grew up in the in the church, such things were passé to talk about of anything that you're talking about the LGBTQIA plus community, if you're talking about them in any other way than them being sinful and in need of a coming back to Jesus, as opposed to a coming out to the world. And so I will just say, particularly as a 7-year-old watching that, it made me sort of reassess and interrupt, quite frankly, some of the this homophobia and patriarchy that you're absorbing on a weekly basis. There
was so much of it back then.
Non-denominational church. Yes, I mean, there's still a lot now, right? But
but it was like in the air,
right? And just the fact as well that he was able to talk about the AIDS crisis when the president at the time, Ronald Reagan. I mean, you brought this up in episodes past, barely uttered a word about it. And look, I mean, I think it's problematic to lionize any human being because they're a human being, and Jesse Jackson certainly had his faults. That being said, I also think it's neglectful to not also acknowledge the impact that somebody had and the courage that they displayed in a given moment. And he did that. So, Nora, keep hope alive. And I know there's times where you, as you alluded to earlier, you feel a little, a little demoralized with what's going on in public health. But I will say you are somebody, to quote Jesse Jackson. Always remember that, my friend. So, anyway.
And may we also keep his politics alive, because they were a real landmark of what progressive politics actually should be. So, thank you for sharing that.
Yes. Well, shall we close out for the day?
We shall. Well, folks, the system may be scripted, but our podcast sure isn't. Thank you for joining our very unfiltered, unpolished debrief every week. If this conversation makes you feel seen or furious, or maybe both simultaneously, please do something with that energy. Start with buying Emily's book, and let's all derig the system together.
Yes, and go get it from an independent bookstore if you can. And a huge thanks to Emily Galvin Almanza, author of The Price of Mercy, for showing us what this country is really willing to pay for justice and showing us all what we need to do to recalculate that bill.
Big thank you as well to our producer, Jessica Partnow, and to Ahamaluo for the music. Both of these lovely humans are responsible for making us sound like we're not crying into our coffee while we read the news headlines every week.
Yes, and we do so appreciate the glow up. You can find us on YouTube, Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky. And please also visit us at inthemeanwhile.com to support the show and experience that particular flavor of self-righteousness that comes from voluntarily supporting free content. We do appreciate it. Yes, we do.
We see you. We really do. The system was built as intended, but we were built to dismantle it. New episodes drop every Friday, and we'll see you in the meanwhile.